AI-driven enterprise archiving. We know AI is transforming how enterprise data is governed, moving from static archives to real-time observable systems. As data growth continues unabated, enterprise archiving is more important than ever to establish an AI-ready data foundation. Our moderator for this panel discussion is Jim Lee, the Vice President of Technical Services at Solix Technologies. I'll turn it over to him to introduce his esteemed panel.
Steve, thank you. Let each person introduce themselves. Gary?
Hi, everybody. I'm Gary Rylander, and I have a couple of decades of experience archiving structured and unstructured data and cleaning up dark data, as well as helping clients in the areas of risk compliance, e-discovery, and records management.
Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Lee, and I'm with Solix. I run our cloud business, our services business. I've been with the company for a number of years, and I spend most of my time helping our clients answer this question and implement archiving solutions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Syed Qadri. I am currently with Western Financial Group, have been working with data management, analytics, building the foundation for data for organizations globally. So happy to be here.
Thank you, everyone. So Steve introduced this topic as the need for archiving. My question is going to be, at some point, do we really need it? We have AI. Doesn't AI do everything for you? Why would we need to do archiving anymore? So panelists, keep that in mind, because that's coming. So first, you might recognize these three. They were on a panel on governance and AI. So what's the intersection between governance and AI and archiving? Mark?
Well, governance is a huge part of any archiving strategy. So, you know, otherwise you could just call it backups. So when you have a record that's at the end of its life cycle, you have to determine how long you want to keep it and how you want to dispose of it. When you want to dispose of it, you have to decide how to secure it, who can access it. These are all elements of how you govern records that you put in your archive. So those two topics are very tightly linked.
Symbiotic, you might say?
Absolutely.
Syed, your thoughts?
I will say that AI and archiving has to work together, because AI generates data, and that data, if you have not properly governed and archived in a way that the models needs to be retrained, and those retraining needs historical data. So we have to have that balance of what is the, I will say, active data and cold, warm data concepts in there. So,
Great point. I'll come back on a couple of the items you touched on. Gary?
I think you put me on this panel for the entertainment factor, because I've sort of been playing. This is an entire string of sessions around AI, and I said yesterday on a couple of occasions, and we've discussed it, that a lot of what you need to do to address dark data, to classify data, can actually be done without AI, and has been done without AI for a long, long time, using a bunch of tools and techniques I talked about yesterday. But the fact of the matter is that modern AI, as opposed to the stuff I started on doing natural language processing 25 years ago, modern AI is getting increasingly good for a lot of what we need to do, and there are at least a couple of ways in which I use it now that I didn't use it earlier in my career, and we can talk about those.
Great. So data fuels AI, yet AI fuels and generates more data. So which is the start and which is the end? Or is it just a complete cycle? You know, the explosive growth that's coming out of AI will allow and here's some interesting numbers. There are estimates that say we will generate 100 billion words a day from some of these AI systems. That means within a year, we will generate trillions of words, more words than man has created in his history. What do we do with all that data? Do we need to keep all that data? Is it all relevant? So I'll start with Gary this time. with all of that data being generated, what decides the data that's valuable? What decides this data could be tossed? And if there's something that's valuable, why is it valuable?
Well, certainly not all the data should be kept. A lot of it is just not of great value for most use cases. But there is data that is valuable that needs to be kept. And the other reason data shouldn't be kept, and mind you, I'm not speaking like an academic, because I'm not one. I'm speaking like somebody who's usually been around legal departments and risk and compliance departments, where any data that you're required to have, you must have, and any data that you're not required to have, that you have, it represents potential liability. So there's usually a desire to, just from a risk management perspective, pare it down. And of course, there is cost. Yes, decreasing storage costs, but there is cost to maintaining data. It seeps into everything, and you know, folks like to talk about how inexpensive a terabyte of storage is these days. But you know, if you look at Gartner's annual numbers, and they tell you that there's usually 1 FTE per terabyte or something like that, suddenly all of the costs back up, and there is cost associated with keeping everything.
Right. Syed, you touched on one interesting topic, retraining. Can you expound on how retraining plays a role in terms of retaining that data?
I will say that is a very, like Gary mentioned, that the cost adds up, but the thing is, how will you audit the data models if the historical data is not there for you? Because the models are trained on the data, and the compliance and the audit to make sure. So it's a balance you have to see to scrape the data which is being used for the model training. And I will say they use AI to create, read those documents, ML models, to see what is relevant data, and create the storage in a tiered storage, what you can bring it back when you have to do an audit on those.
Okay. Mark, any thoughts on why some AI data should be retained?
Yeah, a simple answer, Jim, is I don't know the answer to that question. That's a really interesting question, but it brings to mind, one of the fundamental principles of why people do enterprise archiving, and it's to preserve system of record data. And there's pre-AI, there were lots of types of data that were not system of record that I call derived data, right? This could be copies of data, views, report outputs, all sorts of data outputs that were copies of system of record data. Most people focus their archiving around two primary objectives. One is compliance. There are regulatory frameworks that they have to comply with, and cost reduction, right? You want to retain the data that you're legally required to retain to comply with your business requirements and these regulatory laws and whatnot. So, and you want to do it at the lowest possible cost. So you don't typically keep this derived data, and if you have a good program in place, you are able to classify the data that's derived, that's not needed, it's not system of record, as something that you can get rid of, and you have a process to clean it out so you can keep your costs low.
Right. So, Syed, you mentioned compliance. Can you expound a little bit more on that? Because I think people barely think about AI data needing compliance. In other words, being kept for purposes of compliance. So can you expand on that?
I will say that the data which is used to train the AI models has to be auditable, right? So the results, if you have to go backtrack how that models has been developed, what type of data, what data has been utilized for those. So that is the thing which you have to understand. When we say compliance, is it a PII data? It's been compliant. That we have to redact when we are doing the archiving. Still keeping, maybe I will say, at least the metadata, historical metadata has to be kept on those models.
Okay, Gary?
So there are different reasons for keeping and disposing of data. Risk and compliance is probably the predominant model that most of us who have worked for-profit organizations have addressed. The other side of it, though, and it's been a small part of my career, but it's been there, is knowledge management, retaining information for knowledge management purposes. If you are in a business where you can readily monetize your knowledge and content, then that's a valuable thing to do. I mean, a couple of us have worked in, consulting firms, and probably, the firm that has the best procedures, policies, and technology that I've ever seen for retaining and managing knowledge-based content is McKinsey, because not only does it have technology, but it actually pays incentives to people. It's sort of the Google version of knowledge management. It pays McKinsey consultants when any work product that they created is used by any other consultant in the firm. And that gets back to some of the discussions we had yesterday about the role of monetization in figuring out your strategy for how you want to use AI and how you want to govern the data.
Thank you. So within AI, because it's still new, it's taking data, it's coming up with, based on its own assumptions and its own tweaking parameters, it comes out with a outcome. Its decision, is the decision correct? So there's a concept called explainable AI. That's another reason why you need to retain data. If you had a outcome that perhaps is not what you expected and actually created a situation, you need to be able to explain that AI. So that ties a little bit, Syed, to what you were talking about. You want to add a little bit more to that?
Yes, I completely agree that traceability, like you mentioned, explainable AI is something like how that model has been developed. It's like, and the results, what has been coming out, those needs to be also stored in a way that it can be utilized for the future model training and things like that.
Another thought around this is legal defense. Again, if the AI came up with a decision and it causes a legal problem, such as copyright infringement. Some of us may have heard what happens in this market around copyrights. If that's occurring, how do you prove that the information you use did not violate copyrights? Part of that is, again, retaining that kind of data to prove that, you know what, I did not feed it copyrighted data, and you can figure out what happened afterward. But these are all different reasons why data still needs to be retained, even though it's fed into the system, models have been trained, outcomes are coming, everybody's happy with the outcome, but all of a sudden there's a decision that's that's a kind of unexpected. What are business values now? So these are compliance type. What are some of the business reasons why we might want to retain this data? Mark?
Why we might want to retain
data that's used in a AI scenario for training.
So I'm not sure I followed the question, but I would like to talk a little bit about business value in terms of what AI can bring in an archive scenario. So one of the primary drivers for most of our customers anyway is mergers and acquisitions. So you think about an acquisition scenario, company A acquires company B. Company B is required to move data that is part of their organization into company A. You need a way to manage that data, and the challenge is the applications that created that data do not come along with the transactions, just the data. So you end up with all this data that has no context from the creating application. How do you provide context and meaning for that data for the acquiring company? And AI, I think, is one of the primary ways you can do that by having AI understand the incoming data, provide the context, and provide a way to intelligently access the data so that it's useful to the acquiring company. It's a huge, huge advantage and advance I think that AI will bring to this whole process.
That's a great point.
Not to mention, if the folks wrote code like I did, it was poorly documented,
Yeah.
and you can use AI to regenerate your documentation.
And your code.
And your code.
Gary, any thoughts to add to Mark's comments?
No, I agree completely. It's data is very valuable, in data is very valuable in mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. It's been one of the biggest drivers of the work I've done in this space over the past decade or so. And yes, it's frequently difficult to understand the context of the data, and AI can help with that, because apart from whatever data is being migrated from Salesforce, the Salesforce source to the target system, you can now use all manner of Gen AI and other types of AI tools to understand discussions and documentation around how you built out your Salesforce model to begin with.
Okay, so let's move on. We've talked about a couple of different reasons why you need to retain this data, which then leads to continued growth of this data. So what are some of the challenges now of how to manage this? The clutter, the quality. How do you wrangle this data to the point where it becomes valuable both today as well as later when you need to retrain it and find it? How do we do that?
Well, I think it starts with understanding, right? And one of the techniques that can be applied to understanding the data that you have is using AI to help you classify the records, right? So understand the record, determine, is this a valuable record that we need to retain, or is this, I learned a new acronym this week called ROT, which I had never heard before. Is it in that category? Is it redundant, obsolete, trash? And by understanding and classifying, then you can make decisions and take actions to help you manage this in the most efficient manner possible.
Gary, you've been doing a lot of this for a while.
Yeah, there have been a gazillion surveys going back almost 15 years in my own career. Has helped me to see that typically somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% or less of what most enterprises accumulate in terms of data is actually worth keeping. Upwards up to 70% or so is usually either redundant, obsolete, and trivial, or they would have been records, but they've reached their maturity point, but nobody disposed of them. And it depends on the context. Banks and insurance companies, I'm usually seeing, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% records. Not so highly regulated industries, maybe half of that. But there is a lot that, from a purely regulatory perspective, you can get rid of. But part of looking at the value proposition of what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of also is based on what is the business value, the monetization value of the non-ROT, because ROT is, for the most part, duplicate, and duplication doesn't add any value in any way. But instead of being 30% worth keeping, maybe there's another 20 or 30% that, if you monetized it in some way, would have a greater value than it has right now.
Right, and it's all about monetization. So, Mark, you talked about classification. And Syed, you touched on PII sort of briefly, so let's come back to that topic. I've classified the data. I now understand what I have, and I've got a lot of PII data. So what should be done, Syed?
I will say that you can use AI to read those PDF documents or classify it, redact it, whichever the areas which you need to, because like Mark mentioned, in our organization, we do a lot of acquisitions. And I was having a challenge that our finance don't want to lose any data. they want to keep last 30, 40 years of data for the companies we acquire. So that is what we are trying to do a proper classification, try to organize the data, try to find what is useful data and what we can put it in a more of a very cold data where we can bring it up. And for the PII, we are planning to utilize the AI model to start redacting that information out of that.
Gary?
PII is an interesting case. It's obviously valuable. That's why people steal it every day. I've had a lot of clients who really didn't want to give up the PII. One of them was a big life insurance company whose name you would know. The challenge we have is if I just mask part of a social security number, part of a name, it's so easy to reconstruct that pure masking in and of itself is of limited value in anonymizing the data. So one of the things I've done with a couple of clients like this one is I found a couple of really smart computer science professors who had developed differential privacy software, which was used by Census Bureau and I think IRS and a couple of other agencies, that basically in much the same way that your masking software tokenizes things and creates random values for it, which still allow you to have the format of PII. This sort of does the same sort of thing and allows folks who want to have information to basically have it with randomized values that can't be reconstructed, so that they can use the data set for the kinds of things that life insurance companies would want to use large data sets for.
Right. And for the audience, PII is personally identifiable information. And the reason why it's critical is, should your organization be breached, and there's 100 million records in there, that's actually 100 million violations. And you get fined per violation, it's not per breach.
Yeah, under GLB banking law, was it $100,000 per violation?
So this concept of having PII data as part of your training data, it's great to ensure that you get good outcomes, but you really have to protect yourselves. So Syed, you touched on another topic that was kind of subtle, and I'm not sure whether I picked it up. So I'll start with you again. Can you expound a little bit on tiered storage based on the volume of data?
I will say that utilize the AI to classify the data and then see based on the value of the data, then has an automated tiered storage. Then the data could automatically be pushed into different tiers, and with the proper labeling of it, we can bring it back when we need it from those tiers.
And what's the purpose and what's the benefit of having tiered storage?
First of all, like we all say, the compliance part, we never know when we need it, especially when the amount of data we are generating and amount of data we are utilizing. And to have a proper inventory of the data which has been used for which models we are training for, to have that audit trail for that, we never know. So it's a balance we have to keep in account for that.
Right. Mark, where else have you seen benefits of tiered storage?
It's a simple four-letter word, cost. So the objective of any successful enterprise archive is to store large amounts of data for long periods of time at the lowest possible cost and meet all the compliance and regulatory requirements at the same time. Tiered storage is a great way to help you do that. And it's quite amazing if you look at the difference in cost between the different tiers that are available on the hyperscalers. You know, by default, you know, they put you into the hot tier, and let's say that's $1. The lower tier, the archive tier, the glacier tier, whichever hyperscaler you want to pick from, is usually about 10% of the cost of the hot tier. It's a huge difference. And so if you have to store records for a long period of time, it's great to have these options so you can match up the data access requirements with the appropriate tier so that you can optimize your cost.
Thank you. Gary, any thoughts?
they've said it all. It makes sense for most use cases to take data which is not accessed and put it on low-cost storage. And I think I said yesterday, there's 40 years of library science, information science data that shows that data is mostly used around the point when it's created for transactions and collaboration, and then is rarely touched until it's thrown away. So might as well put it in low-cost tiered storage.
And one advance that's happened in compute architecture over the last decade or so is the advent of this concept of serverless computing, where 20 years ago, if you had structured records, you pretty much were required to put it in a database. And a database is sort of a tightly coupled architecture combining storage and compute. Now with the advent of open table file formats, low-cost object storage, serverless compute engines, you can basically have the benefits of an always-on database without paying the always-on cost of the compute. So you store your structured records in an open table format, you put it in the lowest cost tier that that matches its service level requirement. You spin up the serverless compute engine when you need it, pay for the compute only for the time that you're running the query, and then turn it off. Really helps optimize cost.
Yep, that's right. And combining the thoughts here, again, the volume of data that's coming out of these AI engines and yet needing to retain it, the lowest cost is really what you have to be able to do, because this volume of data is just continuing to explode. So like anything, AI data is new conceptually, and yet data by itself has been around for years. There's a concept of data lifecycle. Data is created or born. Data goes through a high degree of processing, goes through a dormant phase, then it gets purged at some point. Simple data lifecycle. So now we have AI data, and there's a concept of AI data lifecycle. So that includes sourcing data, collecting data, organizing it, prepping, training, and then operationalizing the models. How does the volume of data affect this process? How do you streamline it to make sure you can do this very quickly and cost efficiently? Gary?
Well, so as I said earlier, for all the other tools that I've used, AI is valuable for certain things, and increasingly more so over the past few years. And one of the most valuable things that I found for using AI for is data mastering. I'm an old IBM guy. I'm used to, IBM Informatica, top-down master data management, and it never works very well. Whereas there's a whole new generation of AI tools that you can use to clean up, unify, clean up, and validate structured data, which can then be used to drive your AI model. So while one of the challenges with general purpose large language models is that unless your data happens to be floating around on the internet, you can be sure that the model was not trained on your data. But just out of the box, all of the LLMs are really, really good at things like entity identification and extraction. They know the difference between Mr. Brown, Brown's shoe, South Brown Street, and those sorts of capabilities, as well as being able to do word completion, et cetera. They make it really easy for you to clean up all the nasty data in your Salesforce and Oracle financials and other places. And I'm just astounded how well it works. A little over a year ago, I did an internal project at Iron Mountain, where I've worked for the past 10 years. We had the worst customer and product data you could imagine. 250,000 customers spread across 55 countries around the world. We did a POC, and I looked up, I think it was Mount Sinai Hospital. We had 12 different variations of the name of Mount Sinai Hospital. So different data and different systems. We cleaned up across 4 applications, Salesforce, Oracle, and 2 homegrown ones, using an AI-based system. From the day of installation to the day we validated, we had cleaned up all of the customer and product data. Took less than 8 weeks. you can't do that sort of thing without AI.
Right. Syed, anything to add to that?
No, I completely agree. Like I'll say that most of the organizations, when they talk about data stewardship, they stop at the use of data, how it's generated, how transformed, how it's used, but they forget the data life cycle, which has to be very important and have to be, especially now the data volume is increasing. Day by day, we need to have that proper data life cycle as a part of that.
Mark, any thoughts on the life cycle of AI data?
Yeah, I have this one thought, and I apologize if you guys were in my panel yesterday because I talked a little bit about this, but I think there's an interesting intersection and tension right now between, the possibility of using data to make your AI models better and the need to minimize your data for compliance purposes. Those two things are kind of at odds with one another. And I think I read one of the analyst reports last week that it said companies are starting to reevaluate their retention policies, where in the past maybe they would keep 7 years of financial records and 10 years of product records, and maybe extending those time frames because they are starting to recognize the value of this data for AI purposes. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing that's going to play out over the next few years, and it'll be interesting to see where it lands.
Gary, were you going to say something?
Well, you pick the two use cases for which long-term data storage makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Healthcare, oil and gas, mineral exploitation, because there are properties you could own, you could have tried to drill 40 years ago when the technology was different, that were not viable then but are now. B2B, B2C sort of businesses there, you can do roll-up summary data for old data. For the most part, people who do business with me want to know what I'm buying this month or this year, not what I bought 10 years ago. But there's a real craft to doing retention schedules, and you need to, left to users, don't want to keep everything forever. So you need to understand the business case to do a good retention schedule.
So as we continue to feed data to these language models to refine and get better outcomes, how do we deal with the quality of the data? What are some of the best practices, Syed, you've seen of cleaning up data before the data gets into a system?
I will say that we talked a lot about trends yesterday, and today also we mentioned that to manage the quality of the data, especially the large volume and variety of data is coming, we again are relying, or we have to rely on the AI models, like how to have a better classification of the data, have to try to have the quality managed at the source when we are bringing the data in, not after the data has been in. So have to have that balance.
Okay, Gary?
So a minute ago, we talked a little bit about using AI for structured data. Let's talk a little bit about unstructured data right now and good housekeeping practices. So as I said, there are lots of things you can do that don't require AI. Typically, when we do dark data cleanup, the first thing we do is we do an inventory where we do a histogram of the ages of everything that's out there. We do profiles of the kinds of files that are out there, ages, sizing, et cetera, et cetera. That is all based on metadata, runs it like on a small server, a 1.5 million terabyte an hour or more on one node of a small server. So, for example, every time I do that sort of cleanup, I'll find things like BAK files, backup files, sitting on shared drives, or could be in S3 space, could be wherever. Well, if you have a corporate backup system, then having backup files that are not governed, that are not being rolled over, represents a real risk. From a litigation perspective, you typically would not need to produce data that's only in a backup tape. The one exception is if it's responsive and it's the only copy that's left. So if you blew away, if you were a good housekeeping type and you got rid of everything else, but you had this BAK file sitting out there on your server, you might be required to rehydrate it and produce it to opposing counsel. I see clients that swear they got rid of PST files a decade ago when they started using something like Solix to archive their email, yet you go through files and you find PST files and shared drives and SharePoint. So there are just sort of all sorts of things you can do to help get that data set cleaned up early on. The other thing you should do is using a records retention schedule. There is, as you mentioned earlier, there's a concept of the copy of record and convenience copies. You can and should take your retention schedule and decide that, well, I may have invoices all over the organization, but my copy of record for invoices is my SAP or Oracle financial system, and any invoice I find anywhere outside of that, I'm going to consider a convenience copy or ROT. The other advantage of doing that is it's a lot easier to manage that invoice information with its attached PDF invoice in Solix as being attached to structured data than it is for a bunch of PDFs to be floating around on a shared drive. So those are some of the kinds of things that you can do to help get your data set, your unstructured data set, ready to manage properly.
No, another thought on that is you could use AI to clean up the quality of the data before you feed it into the system.
Yeah,
Mark?
exactly. I agree. I was going to comment on that. I think you're seeing, if you look at all of the vendors in the governance space, including Solix, almost all of us are working to bring agentic AI into the data quality and cleansing area. It's a perfect use case for agents to go in and, evaluate large volumes of data, identify the anomalies, and, with the proper sort of human in the loop oversight, actually make the corrections. So I think that's going to become the norm very quickly.
Yeah, I agree, and it's going to be done faster and more accurately. Syed?
I will
Can
add that.
Can I
is-
just
sorry.
the challenge with that is, you remember a potential client we talked to together who said the 2 levels of approval in Solix were insufficient. They wanted 3 levels of approval to blow something away.
True.
Clients like that are all over the place.
That is
They're mostly
absolutely
my
true, Gary.
clients.
Syed?
I will just add to it that with this large amount of data, there is a high percentage of redundant data there. So that is where AI can go crawl it and clean up the redundant data instead of double archiving them.
Yep, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about the data, the volume, the management of it, how some of these other disciplines can help you manage that environment. How about now let's reverse the other way. How can AI help the archiving side? Again, this goes back to it's a 360 view. Data drives AI, AI drives data. So now we've talked about how archiving, other management methods can help AI side. How about the reverse? How can AI speed up, improve, perhaps do more accurately the archiving steps? I'll start with Mark on that one.
So we already talked about the data access side of things, so I won't repeat that. But on the governance side, I think you'll see AI helping to classify the records so that you can put them under proper governance control. I think you'll see AI helping in defining the rules and configurations of the archive itself to build the archiving logic. I think that will, particularly for removing older records out of active applications, I think that'll be a huge advantage. So those 3 areas I think are the most ripe for advancements: intelligent data access, intelligent data governance, and intelligent building of archiving logic.
Okay. Gary, any thoughts?
No, those all sound like reasonable candidates to me. As I said, I've taken something of a contrarian view for a good part of my career. Since a lot of what I've done has been to classify against retention schedules, which usually have 100 or 200 or 300 record classes, most kinds of AI systems didn't work very well. I'd use random support vector model, naive Bayes, et cetera, and typically the training data is insufficient to get really high level F1 scores on that, and it turned out to be easier just to use a bag of expression, a bag of words and regex. But what I've seen more recently, really over the past couple of years, is LLMs are made possible by Google's development of transformers, which tokenized large blocks of text. Well, before we used transformers to do LLM, Google first did it to basically improve clustering. The very first natural language processing algorithm I ever used was k-means, to look at individual words in a bag of words and put them into clusters. Well, if you look at something like BERT or BERT Topic or modern BERT, which came out a year ago, those same tokens which drive LLM are also really, really good for doing clustering, which is really the best way to see the naturally occurring topics and categories of information that are occurring out in a corpus of data.
So, we've gone through quite a few topics. I'm going to give each of you guys a chance to leave us with your parting thoughts on how do we help people in the audience understand we're all excited by AI. You're only here because you're excited by AI. We want to do more with AI, and yet we know we've got to do better and make sure that we protect ourselves on how we do this. So, parting thoughts, Syed?
I will say that let's start thinking of how to have those retention archiving policies, make it machine readable part of the AI models, where the AI can classify, read the document, save it, and then as soon as that retention threshold is reached, it automatically takes it and move it into different tiers of archival storage.
Okay, Mark?
So I think it's all about trying to find use cases that are going to produce very real and tangible returns, right? So, the way I look at that is where are the challenges, where are the bottlenecks, where are the opportunities to improve and apply AI in those areas, crawl, walk, run kind of model. That's sort of the way we're approaching it at Solix.
Okay, and Gary?
Ditto what he said. If you're driven by governance and risk and compliance in your organization, then use AI-based archiving to achieve that. If you're interested in making lots of money, if that's the primary mission of your organization, then think long and hard about how you can build successful businesses around the data, and how you can then use AI to clean up and leverage that data to achieve that monetization.
Okay, well, first of all, let's give our panelists a warm thank you. Guys, thank you very much for your opinions, your thoughts. Everybody have a great day.